Buenos días a todos.
Good morning, everybody. It's a pleasure to be able to welcome you all to this final webinar. It's the conclusion of a cycle that started up several weeks ago. My name is Graciela Gasset, and I'm the person in charge of the CIEC at CENTRO. And we're in the final stages of this project that we started up together with the Canadian Embassy here in Mexico and Canadian Heritage to be able to map several creative sectors here in Mexico and what opportunities, business opportunities it might be in terms of future projects for the creative industry. We've been working on having this research take place, which will ultimately provide you with a report, and in which we've been speaking with the experts in the different fields, which have included many fields in the creative industry, including fashion design and so on. And this time around, it's going to conclude with the performing arts. The idea of having these conversations is to be able to talk with Canadian companies, give them an overview of what's happening in Mexico in general, and to jointly look into opportunities. I wanted to mention that this conversation will be taking place in Spanish, but we do have interpretation available into English and French. And before we begin, I would like to welcome Ernesto Miranda, who is the representative of the Canadian Embassy on this occasion, to give a few closing remarks regarding this project that we've been working on jointly. And I'd like to thank you, Ernesto, for joining us today. Thank you, Graciela. Hello, everybody. It's a pleasure, as Graciela said, to be able to reach this almost final point, which began several months ago. It began because we organized it at the Canadian Embassy in Mexico together with Canada Heritage to have this map, to have intelligence, market intelligence regarding what's happening here in Mexico and offer more opportunities for the creative industries in Canada so that they can work here in Mexico. As Graciela said, this final webinar or this final session will focus on the performing arts. And with that, we would conclude this cycle of conversations and briefings that we've had that are contributing to provide more opportunities for us to see what else we can do together. And as Graciela said, we will soon be publishing the final report, which will encompass all of the sectors, as well as any final comments that might arise from this session, as well as all the other sessions. This is one of a series of initiatives that we've conducted at the at the Trade Department, rather, in the Canadian Embassy. And of course, we're at your service if you need any help. Please contact us immediately if you're interested in learning more about the creative ecosystem in Mexico and what opportunities you might find here. Please contact us at the Canadian Embassy in Mexico. As you know, all over the world and here in Mexico, the creative industries have been significantly affected by the pandemic. And the performing arts have been affected even more. We've started to see some signs of reopening of the creative economic sector. And so we hope that by the year 2022, we'll be able to go back to the normal that we will be living with, and which hopefully will let Canada and Mexico continue to work jointly. I'd like to thank all of the participants in this cycle and in this session. I think that I would also like to thank all of the Canadian participants. We would, of course, welcome all of your comments and feedback to see what else we can do between our two countries. And I would like to thank Andrea, Moreno, everybody at the Centro who have been helping us to organize this event. It's been a tough job, but it's been very fruitful. And I know that the Canadian Embassy wouldn't have been able to do it on our own without the assistance of Centro. So thank you very much. Thank you for giving us the opportunity of hearing more about the industries, creative industries, many opportunities to be had. for Canadian entrepreneurs. Thank you. Thank you, Ernesto. Okay, let me show you who our guests are going to be this time around. And to start off, I would like to introduce Fernanda del Monte. She's an expert in transmedia narratives and a professor at the master's program in scriptwriting at CENTRO. She'll be providing us with some data. And this is something we always do, in which she'll be telling us a little bit more about the performing arts here in Mexico. So Fernanda, you have the floor. Thank you very much, Graciela. Hello, everybody. Welcome to this webinar, which is the last in a cycle of the Creative Panorama series. First, I'd like to tell you a little bit about the performing arts right now, especially bearing in mind the pandemic and its impact. Perhaps over the past few months, we've also been thinking about how we can build more bridges and start to work with other sectors as well as other countries. And so I think that being able to talk more about the performing arts in this final webinar will be very interesting. And we will have some very interesting panelists, as you probably already know. It will be Juan Meliá, Veronica Lopez, and Boris Schoemann. And they'll be telling us a little bit later on about what the performing arts scenario looks like in Mexico. We're specifically going to talk about theater, circus arts, dance, and interdisciplinary performances. Those four sectors of the performing arts, which is obviously a very broad sector, are the focus of our session this time around. And so to continue with this conversation, let's talk a little bit about the numbers. Graciela will be helping me with that, right? You'll be putting them up on the screen. We know, for example, that Mexico is the fourth largest supplier of cultural products to Canada. And so our connection with Canada is quite extensive. There's quite a bit of exchange of cultural products between our two countries. And we're also the ninth biggest exporter in the creative sector globally. That is to say, in terms of what Mexico produces and provides to the rest of the world. In the performing arts field, Mexico also has significant infrastructure in many of our cities. In Mexico City, for example, we know that we have 160 theaters. And here on the screen, for example, we have the information regarding the GDP. 3.1% of Mexico's GDP is related to the cultural sector, and of that 3.1%, 5.6% is represented by the performing arts, which just goes to show that the performing arts is extremely important, and that in terms of job opportunities and production, it is very significant nationwide. And this includes dance, music, live performances, performing arts, and so on. As I was saying, we have infrastructure located throughout the whole country, but I think it's also important for you to know that within that infrastructure, there is still quite a bit of centralization taking place when you look at the cities and the cities in which those theaters are located and what type of audiences go to those theaters. 20% of the public, the Mexican public, has gone to the theater, well, prior to the pandemic, which means that there's still quite a bit of the country and a significant number of the population that could still see an increase in their attendance at these types of performances. In terms of theater infrastructure, we've seen that people are interested in all types of performing arts. They love musicals, tragedies, the opera, dramas, and comedy. In terms of the performing arts and how we can position the sector here in Mexico, I would say that it's clear that theater is an important way or driver for people to go to the theaters, but it could grow. The same thing applies with infrastructure. We know that Mexico City is the one that tends to have most of the infrastructure in the country compared to the rest of the country. In Mexico, for example, Mexico City, there were 164 theaters, whereas in the state of Veracruz and in the state of Nuevo León, there are 30 to 32 and 30 and 32 theaters throughout the entire state, respectively. And in the state of Mexico, Jalisco and Puebla, there are 29 theaters. So that's just to show that when we're talking about Mexico, we should also consider how these audiences are distributed throughout the country. In 2020, the cultural department at the National Autonomous University in Mexico conducted a quantitative and qualitative study to determine how the audiences have been behaving over the past few years. This research encompassed 8,780 people who were surveyed, and half of them were located in Mexico City, and the remaining 51.3% were located in the rest of the country, which also points to what I mentioned previously regarding infrastructure. The audiences in Mexico City are much more accustomed to going to the theater or going to any type of theater to watch dance performances or interdisciplinary performances, whereas the remaining 50% is distributed throughout the entire country, the rest of the entire country. As I was saying previously, within the performing arts, 23% of the audiences go to theaters, to the theater to watch the opera, to see plays, musicals, but there are other sectors that are very appealing to people, such as concerts, which I thought that it would be important for us to also talk about interdisciplinary performing arts, because that's a sector that is growing in leaps and bounds, and that also is something that would include the circus arts. The remaining 11.3% of the audience attends dance performances. Now, based on all of these statistics that I've just provided you with, I'd like to ask the panelists to please provide us with their comments and to tell us what challenges they feel the performing arts are facing right now. And now I would like to ask Juan Meliá, who is a theater director at the National Autonomous University of Mexico, to please tell us a little bit about what the audience is like in Mexico, what type of a general overview we could give to the Canadian entrepreneurs about the performing arts scene in Mexico. Welcome. Good morning, everybody. Thank you very much, Ernesto, Graciela, as well as Centro for this invitation, and Fernanda for introducing me. It's a pleasure to be here with you and to be able to be here as well with Veronica and Boris. As you just heard from Fernanda, it's important to remember that 4 surveys have been conducted that I feel are extremely important and that you should have access to, so you can have a clearer idea as to what's happening in Mexico. One of the surveys is called the Satellite Account for Culture in Mexico, which gives you a very general overview of the economic impact that that sector has on the country. The second one refers to the SIC study, which is the System for Cultural Information, which is part of the Ministry of Culture. And then there's a third survey, which is not very well known, and that is developed by the Statistics Institute here in Mexico, the INEGI, and is a study that refers to the attendance of Mexicans to cultural events. And that's the study that was conducted in 2016. And then the final one refers to activities this is something that we did at the Department of Culture at the National Autonomous University of Mexico, or the UNAM, in which a study was conducted in the midst of the pandemic. And what I wanted to mention particularly is that Mexico is a very culture-focused country. It's something that is part of the daily lives of Mexicans in every sense of the word, but it also is different in the sense that it's always looking for accomplices and partners on the international level. And that's what I want to refer to right now. And I would also like to mention that I'm not just going to focus on the economic side, although we're all celebrating the creative industries for sustainable development. We shouldn't, I think, just focus on economy. I think that culture and art have a lot of other dimensions to it, and that has to be taken into account to improve this exchange of information between our two countries. In terms of performing arts, spaces are very important. Mexico has more than 700 performing arts spaces or venues. But what I wanted to mention is that those spaces, those venues, are located in less than 200 cities throughout our country. There are 2,200 municipalities in our country that do not have a theater. And those more than 700 theaters that I referred to, 70% of them are public, whereas the others are either private or independent or commercial, let's say. And what distinguishes them is that very few of them develop their own productions. That is to say, they use plays that were created by third parties. And in order to survive, they rent out their venues to others, which on many occasions, those rents are not actually used for cultural activities. And so my first tip of advice would be, my first advice would be that you find the right type of partner, and remember that our society is very much accustomed to attending events. In 2019, for example, 57.8% of Mexicans went to a cultural activity. The numbers dropped in 2019, 2020 because of the pandemic. But what people love to do is go to the movies with 50% of them, concerts with 27%. And these are numbers from 2019, by the way. 25% love to go to the theater and 15% love to go to expos. What I wanted to mention is that the Mexican model is not very well known. And so I think these types of activities are going to be useful so that we can acknowledge what's happening, as well as to understand what you're wondering and are interested in, so that we can have more interesting processes between our two countries. Let me tell you a little bit about our weaknesses. One is that we have institutional public production that is very poor, and we don't really focus on making sure that these works are distributed throughout the nation. We tend to just focus on our own cities and don't distribute them elsewhere. And we forget to focus on our strengths. For example, Boris Schoemann has a theater called La Capilla, in which he can do a lot of things, and a lot more could be done. What we have as our strong points is the fact that we have creators that are highly specialized in different fields. And we also have specialists, not only in direction, dramaturgy, and so on, but all the fields related to the performing arts. And we have public institutions that are independent, that are very specialized and specific, that do produce works and that do create programs and projects as well as activities. How can we know who they are and how can we approach them? Well, the first thing I think would be important is that we distinguish the way in which we have worked between our two countries. It would seem that we've only been prioritizing the organization of international festivals or international activities that we've organized separately most of the time in each one of our countries. seeking to sell our works, selling our works to each other, let's say. But we haven't focused on co-productions in which we can invite independent specialists to develop a joint process, because Mexico has more than 30 universities that provide theater or choreography degrees. We also work very diligently with editorials, publishing magazines. We have a high expertise in many fields, creative fields, and we have wonderful production centers, either independent or public, in addition to the many festivals we hold. And perhaps I can say more about this during my second comments. Fernanda, I'll give you back to Mike. Thank you very much, Juan. All right, now let's move on to Veronica Lopez, who is a curator, cultural manager, critic, a theater critic, and a cultural journalist. Thank you very much. Can you tell us a little bit about the audiences here in Mexico from your point of view? Because you're not in Mexico City, so it's important to know how you see things. It's important that Canadians know a little bit more about the other places in which performing arts have a place. And I would also like to ask you, what type of projects do you think could become more of an international type, and what type of performances, Canadian performances, might find a public or an audience here in Mexico? Thank you very much. Thank you all. Well, what I would be able to say to you is my comments based on my experience where I live, which is the city of Guadalajara in the state of Jalisco, which has a very abundant cultural life and that has gotten stronger over the years. Many of those who are joining us today in Canada and who are an active part of the cultural sector probably remember our city, because on many occasions we've had an exchange, a cultural and artistic exchange with you. As to the type of audiences that we have here in Mexico, well, in the case of Guadalajara, it's a university town in which there are public universities, which are extremely important in terms of the cultural development of the region and even nationwide. But there are also other universities and other collective organizations on the cultural side that have been creating many projects in which an exchange can take place. The audiences for the performing arts, which includes the circus arts, by the way, is basically young, college age, and they're the ones who we have slowly managed to grow. It's a challenge. We know that it's been very complicated because the transition that has taken place in the government, most of those spaces or venues or forums where performing arts can be organized are public. That is to say, the theaters and the venues in which you can organize a performing arts event are part of the public sector, which means that there's a specific way of organizing things and a specific way of doing things. Luckily, things have been diversifying lately because there are now quite a few independent venues that have been created over the past 10 years. And there are also collectives. basically circus collectives. Guadalajara is a city which over the past, let's say, 10 years has focused on production circus, on the production of circus performances. For example, we have an international festival called Periplo, which had to be canceled in 2020, obviously because of the pandemic. But we have been able to increase our connections with the other sectors in Guadalajara, and there are several other organizations such as Circo Alebrije and Circo Dragón that have started to even create schools. The circus has played a key role in opening independent spaces or venues in the city. I would also say that it's important to mention that the most important cultural festival in the state of Jalisco is one that is held in the state of May. It just concluded very recently, although this time around it had to be a hybrid event in which they focus more on the plastic arts because of the situation right now. But that festival has also helped us to create very sound foundations with Canada. Thanks to that international festival, Quebec participated because it's been a special guest on several occasions, in addition to Canada on the whole. Dance troupes, circus groups, and theater groups have had performances there for the past 20 years. Because that festival celebrated its 24th anniversary this year. And so that just goes to show how important the circus arts are here in Guadalajara. The fact that this international festival is organized here in Guadalajara has helped to strengthen the circus arts in Guadalajara, and that we've been able to organize festivals such as Periplo, because the guests have been a part of the guests at this festival, and that has been the case since the very beginning. And they've included the possibility of being able to strike up a direct conversation with Canada so that they could have Canadian performers as well. But we still haven't managed to do that conclusively is co-production. I think that the situation in which we currently find ourselves is one in which it's still a very new sector, although it's very strong. But I'm sure that we'll be able to create joint projects and have perhaps projects going to travel to Canada at some point. And so I think that would be the comment, my initial comment I would make. As to what types of productions could be carried out in other countries, well, in Guadalajara, I would say that the best things we could work with are the circus arts, not only because of the level of expertise that they currently have, but also because the Alebrije Circus, for example, has played in Paris. It's won international awards with its performances, but also because of the way in which everything works, and the fact that you don't have to worry so much about the language, because translation can be an issue. The way in which our bodies speak is something that can be understood internationally because it's very human, and the way in which everything is created within the circus arts makes it possible to build these types of bridges. And so I think that the circus arts, as well as music, are those fields in which, in the specific case of Guadalajara at least, we've got a pretty sound basis. And I think that we can continue to improve that situation, though. So that would be my initial comment, Fernanda. Thank you very much, Vero. Yes, in that sense, dance is a very good form of building narrative bridges between our two countries. And it's true that when you don't need to speak and you don't require translation, when all you need to do is use your body, it's a lot easier to have exchanges thanks to the movement of our bodies. And we know that there are bridges that don't just have to focus on the economic facet. It's true that we have to remember what happens with our emotions when we go through these performances, so that our productions can be shown in Canada and Canadian productions can be shown in Mexico, always focusing on the interdisciplinary nature, because in Canada, I know that they would be able to find a wonderful audience in Mexico that is very interested in Canadian productions, and not just to consume the product that they have, but also to have a purpose of educating and training as well. So we'll continue to talk about how we can continue to build these bridges and find new ways of having exchanges between our countries. And to that end, I would like to invite Boris Schoemann, who is the artistic director of the La Capilla Theater and also the director of the International Week of Contemporary Dramaturgy, which is a very important festival that, festival that has been taking place for many years and has played an important role between Canada and Mexico. So, Boris, I would like to ask you, how would you define the actual relationship that exists between Mexico and Canada? Because Canadian dramaturgy is very valued and well known in Mexico, but it could expand as well. In terms of festival productions and private and public models, how do you think we could increase the interactions between our two countries? Welcome. Thank you very much, Fernanda. Thank you all. Thank you to the organizers. And as to what you're asking, well, there are thousands of things I could say. And I don't know what I should focus on, but yes, I'll try to build upon what Veronica and Juan have already said. The first thing I would do is contradict what had previously been said, that music, circus, and dance is easier to export, because yes, it's true all over the world. We know that when there's visual language taking place, it's a lot easier to cross borders. But in the case of Canada, I think it's perhaps one of the few countries where Mexico has significant exchanges taking place, even with translations, thanks to Banff, thanks to the Dramatic Center, Dramatic Actors Center, thanks to the World Workshop in Montreal, thanks to so many institutions. We know that Canada is focusing on translating these types of works, more specifically plays, into different languages. And in the case of Quebec, for example, they seek to encourage the use of French, to preserve French and export it, because they know that it's a cultural asset that is extremely valuable and that it can be exported. So I think that in Mexico, perhaps what we would have to do is be aware of that and understand that we can export our playwrights, our actors, our productions in general. Although what Fernanda said regarding the multidisciplinary aspect is also very appealing, in order to be able to hold these types of Canadian events in Mexico, because they're always very successful with the audience. I've also seen that dramaturgy, theater, once it's been translated, helps to build bridges between our two countries. And I know that there are a lot of cultural affinities. And so one thing that is written in Mexico can be seen in Canada, and the other way around. whether the play, for example, was written in English or in French, it can be viewed in Mexico, and they're both very successful. And perhaps they're even more successful than products coming in from the Southern Cone, Europe, or the US. And we, for example, have a lot of musical reviews, but that's a different type of situation. In Canada, with Canada, it's very different. The relationship that we have with them is very different because we have more affinities, and we feel that we back each other up greatly, and that we want to continue to build these types of bridges. Mexican dramaturgy has been exported and translated and been welcomed in Canada because they're always interested in learning about new works. Canada is a wonderful country to which we can export. And what's more, there are a lot of festivals organized here in Mexico that are trying to figure out what type of work can be shown in our country as well as other countries, because in Canada, the government subsidizes artistic activities. And I think that's where we should learn from them, how culture and identity helps us all in each one of our countries. Canada has a policy of providing aid to the performing arts, and it has been the case for many years. And I think that's something we should do in Mexico as well, to have this culture in which we connect entrepreneurs with cultural activities. In Mexico, there would be thousands of opportunities to do so. All we have to do is find the political and financial mechanisms in order to be able to see how this could work by getting international financing, for example, to help with the development of either troops, companies, or production companies, or help those independent organizations that could continue to have more connections with Canada and Mexico, for that matter. Sometimes when I've seen a translation of something that was created in Canada, I've seen how they can subsequently be sent to Mérida, Querétaro, Guadalajara, Monterrey, all those big cities in Mexico. And that's very good because that helps the text to be more well-known, and for those productions to be able to be organized elsewhere in the country. Perhaps I would conclude my initial comments by saying the following. You were asking about the festivals, Fernanda. Well, festivals are great. They help you to bring in a lot of people and have a great time. But I think that residencies are also something that are very important that Canada has worked on. You and I have had the opportunity of having a residency with the CALC. And that's something that we can always take advantage of because you establish close relationships with everybody. And this is because your residency somewhere is very helpful to create a good and solid relationship. And so I think that that's something that we should focus on in the future, to have residency programs to be able to help with what we're doing. I think that the developing of residents here in Mexico would be very appealing. We've gone to many cities in Canada to translate works, but what if we could bring to Mexico authors from other parts of the world that can help with theater production? Because the appeal of living in Mexico, for example, and creating or translating in Mexico is also very new and very different, and it would be good for Canada as well. And so you don't just have to come for vacations to Mexico. You could also have a creative vacation in Mexico through a residency program, which I'm sure would be very fruitful in Mexico. And with that, I would conclude my comments. Thank you very much, Boris. I agree with you. When we were talking about this webinar of the performing arts, I was telling Graciela that I had the opportunity of writing a play in theater, a play in Canada, and I presented it to Canada, and it was very interesting. And so I think it would be wonderful if we could bring Canadian artists to Mexico to share their well, not just the way in which they produce, but also the way in which they create. One of the things I was able to notice in Canada was that I was able to go see how they were organizing their events, the montage. And I think that's one of the things that is very important, that we look into the pedagogical possibilities in terms of direction, how to create the whole line of artistic production and staging, and how everything is handled in Canada, because I believe that Mexico has a sector in which there are a lot of people who are interested in working with us and with Canada. And so those types of exchanges would be very good, and they work in a more of a holistic fashion. So we would have to be able to know how to welcome an artist here in Mexico, in addition to be able to see how we can have an exchange of the ways in which that artist specifically creates, and how that could also make sure that the Mexican audiences, the Mexican art students, for example, to be able to broaden their horizons in terms of the different ways of creating things is concerned. And so now I'd like to hand the floor once again to Juan Meliá. I've got a few questions for you. I don't know if what we should do now. Are you okay with that, or would you like to handle it some other way? But I think that it would be important to know if there's anything that you would like to emphasize in terms of these possible exchanges between Mexico and Canada. Is there anything in particular you would like to suggest? Thank you very much. Well, the first thing I would like to say is that the performing arts are perfectly prepared to increase the exchanges between our two countries. But I would like to say something that is key. How can we go from an accident to something that is done on a constant basis? I think that right now there have been coincidences, an accident in which we've had production with Canada and Mexico. That, in spite of the fact that we have very common affinities and objectives in our cultural lives. I think that we're both concerned about society. We're both concerned about the rights that we're defending, in which we're talking about the integration of minorities into our programs, and also the importance that we both give to new forms of creation and how creators have to be given more leeway. And so I think that this is something we would only be able to achieve if we were to increase our exchanges. Setting aside the festivals, perhaps we should start to focus on other ways of developing the relationship between our two countries. I must confess, but please don't tell anybody else this, but I would say that we're better associates, and we collaborate more than buy more. We love festivals, and that's why we've been seen as a country that buys works, that would bring in works to Mexico. But things have changed over the years, and there are now new ways of operating in our country in terms of performance arts, the performing arts, for example. And now there are many more academic centers that have been created, and that has led to our being able to think differently. What is our main problem? Well, I think it's the lack of information between our two countries, and the fact that we're subject to a trade agreement that focuses exclusively on the economic facet, and in which culture is not an important point other than copyrights. And that has created a model that is very different from that of Europe, in which cultural activities are extremely important in terms of employment. They have their own policies, whereas we here in the northern continent in the northern part of the continent, we haven't been able to do that. We don't have common policies between our three countries, for example. That I think that greatly weakens us as a region. I think it would be I don't think I would be able to tell you who you could work with today, although I have I know many specialists that are very good, such as Iran Pareo, Geoffrey Freibo, who is also very familiar with our country. But what I would offer you from my side is that we have a directory of at least 10 people or institutions in different fields: dramaturgy, independent theater, specialists in staging, so on, in order to be able, for us to be able to continue to work with you as well as other experts, so that we can have even sounder bridges built between our two countries. If we were to have that type of information, I think that we will have to take the next step, and I would be the first one to take that next step. And so the first thing that we should do is learn about what we could do with you in different fields. And I think that's something that we haven't been doing up until now. As Boris was saying, dramaturgy is a very important piece of the puzzle. But we also have to remember that we have experts in many other fields, such as staging, sound, and so on. And they all will play an important role. And we also have a group or a series of festivals, laboratories, residencies, and academic activities that are carried out in Mexico and that have not been included in what has often taken place between our two countries, which is something that I think we should include in the directory or that package of information that I was referring to a moment ago, so that you can all familiarize yourselves with what is available. I'd like to hand the floor back to you, Fernanda. Thank you, Juan. Before we move on to Boris's comments, I'd like to read the comments that have come up on in the chat box. Hello, my name is Graciela Sanchez. I think that there are several examples of bilateral cooperation and exchanges between our two countries, including what's happening with Quebec. A recent example was the Emerging Arts Institute in Querétaro, in the state of Querétaro. I agree with Boris in the sense that we have to increase our residencies. And perhaps we should also encourage other opportunities of collaboration and co-production. There are already examples of cooperation between universities in Mexico and in Canada, but perhaps that's not enough. So perhaps that's why we should get back to you, Boris, and what you were saying. Well, as to how we can move ahead with our cultural and artistic connection between our two countries, well, I think it could be done through companies. And I'd like to give you some examples that I believe are interesting to emulate them or encourage them. 20 years ago, when I started to work with the theater, the La Capilla theater, initially, I was always trying to figure out how to stay afloat, because we don't have subsidies from the state or from the local government nor the federal government, as is the case in other countries such as Canada. And so we had to find different ways of doing so with Mexican organizations that do so by requesting funds and also working with private institutions. And so I worked with Quebec, and they were able to connect me with somebody at Scotiabank, and who said that they were very interested in backing the performing arts. And it was a 2-year relationship that helped us to cover a lot of our expenses back then, and which is not something that takes place very often, because I don't know why, or perhaps it's because in Mexico we're not used to creating these types of commercial bonds, let's say, which are very important in order to be able to find a way to work on joint projects for the benefit of all, which is why it's so important that we understand what the needs are on everybody's side and how to help them with those needs. Obviously, residencies would be very important to be able to build stronger relationships, and festivals are also very important. Thanks to an invitation to a theater for children and youth events in Canada, we were able to translate a Mexican play into French, and then it was presented in Montreal. And I think that children's theater as well as youth theater is something that is growing quite a bit recently. I know that there are a lot of people that have been working with Montreal. We at La Capilla, well, there's also been a lot of work being done with Vancouver, and we've also been working with Toronto. So whenever we can make these types of exchanges, people are surprised of the many cultural opportunities in Mexico. This is a very new field, though, in which I think that a lot of things could be done. And perhaps that would be very important for us to do. Dramaturgy has developed greatly. There are a lot of bridges that have been established, and there are a lot of possibilities of dramaturgy here in Mexico. We've been able to translate a lot of works from French into Spanish, but it would be important for us to be able to do it the other way around as well, in order to have co-productions in Canada. And I think this would be wonderful because we're starting to not just export, but also import. We right now, for example, import much more than we export because we don't have the funds, which is something that you do have in Canada, thanks to the Conseil des Arts. That's something that we used to have in Mexico, but we no longer do have that. And so co-productions, because of that, have been affected. As Juan said, there are a lot of creators here in Mexico who are very experts in their fields, and they would be able to contribute much in the same way that you have in Canada. We would love to have experts to be able to come to Mexico to teach us. Sometimes when they come to Mexico for an event, they are able to hold some type of educational event as well afterwards, but that would be wonderful to continue. I think with that, I would conclude my remarks. Thank you so much. We're almost at the end of our time, so let's just ask Veronica for her final comments. Vero, in your experience, how can we broaden our horizons? How can we continue to expand our horizons also in terms of cultural management and exchanges of managing activities, let's say, in combination with the performing arts? I think by establishing more direct contact, because somebody was talking about the creation of a directory. Juan was saying that in the specific case of Guadalajara, where I live, we've done a lot through the state, but the collective groups, the performing arts groups, and not, well, and that includes dance, circus, and theater, have the capacity, the creative capacity and ability to be able to establish contact with others so that they can continue to spread their works elsewhere, to be able to go international. And so I believe that we shouldn't have to depend so much on an official or institutional interlocution, which usually takes place between the cultural ministry, either at the state or municipal level, or the participation of organizations such as universities. It's wonderful for them to exist because we need them. We need them to work and make sure that they get stronger. But we should also look into the possibility of having a direct dialogue between ourselves, between the dance troupes, theater companies, circus companies, in order to be able to have the possibility of creating circuits, let's say, in which we could learn from each other, have co-production, collaboration projects that go far beyond just buying and selling shows or performances, rather that we find a way to have a dialogue and establish a meeting point between our two countries. I think that's what I would say, Fernanda. Graciela, would you say a few closing comments? David has a comment here. It says, if we could perhaps, the comment from David is perhaps we could create a system of exchanges backed by the government so that we could have more democratic products in which everybody could participate under the umbrella of the arts. That's a wonderful idea. Thank you for participating. Well, as you were saying, Fer, we've run out of time. 1 hour is never enough time because there's so many things we would like to talk about and we'd like to share with our Canadian audience to look into ways in which we could collaborate with you. Could everybody please turn on your cameras as part of this official closing ceremony? Thank you all who have joined us throughout this cycle. And we'd like to thank everybody who's been joining us over the months. I think it started out in March, right? And it became like a habit for us to have these types of conversations. We hope that this conversation will be able to continue with CENTRO and with the Canadian Embassy. It's very important, especially for my department, which is the CIEC, the CIEC, because we want to know how we can systematize the information regarding the creative industries here in Mexico. I think this is a wonderful opportunity for us to look into that, as well as to understand what the status of our sectors are, or is rather, and what else we can do to have global relations through the Canadian Embassy in Mexico. I'd like to thank Canadian Heritage and the Embassy once again. Please expect the report. The report, by the way, is going to be published in English, Spanish, and French, by the way. The distribution will be carried out through the Embassy, and there you'll find a link because it's going to be an interactive digital project in which you're going to be able to have access to the recordings of these webinars. And so all of the findings and all of the insights that we have will be within your reach. And so, well, we've run out of time. Have a great day. And thank you to all our guests and experts, those that joined us from Centro, as well as all of our guests. Thank you for joining us from Canada. Thank you, everybody. Thank you.